Okay, so first I would like to introduce our moderator for tonight's conversation. Ann Bodle-Nash is a writer of fiction and nonfiction and a radio journalist for KSBR FM Community Radio in Mount Vernon, Washington. She's a member of the Skagit Valley Writers League, and her work is represented in various publications, including Shark Reef, Dunn Magazine, The Barn Book, and Tales for a Lazy Afternoon. She lives in Bow, Washington with her husband and is currently working on a memoir relating to aphasia, a communication disability within her family. And now for our featured author tonight. Linda M. Kurth is a writer and a divorced and remarried Christian living with her husband in the home of their hearts in Washington, Skagit Valley. She writes for both children and adults. Her divorce prompted her to create her blog, Help and Healing for Divorced Christians, where she gives helpful advice and encourages churches to fully embrace divorced people, especially women. She's here tonight to present this book right here, God, the Devil, and Divorce, a transformative journey out of emotional and spiritual abuse. So please welcome Linda M. Kurth and Ann Bodle-Nash.
Thank you, Claire. I appreciate the introduction, as I'm sure Linda does also. Many of you know Linda, and you know that she has a new book out, which is why we're all here tonight. It's a memoir entitled, as Claire just said, God, the Devil, and Divorce. And as I reflected on the title, I certainly thought that it was a provocative title and probably reflects the struggles she and many others have, particularly in religious communities, when contemplating a divorce. So, we're going to chat with Linda and explore what prompted her to write this memoir and what others can possibly learn from her experiences. Welcome, Linda.
Thank you, Anne.
As you detail in your book, you led an artsy, hippie sort of lifestyle before your marriages. What you described was not uncommon in the mid 60s. So I'm curious, how did you move from that lifestyle to a more restricted, at least seemingly more restricted, and perhaps religiously conventional one?
Oh, that's a surprise question. Let's see.
Sorry. I mean, I learned a lot about you right off the bat,
Right.
and I've known you a while, but I I enjoyed reading about your earlier life.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure there will be people surprised about that. Um, well, part of it was the times, of course. You
Hmm.
know, everybody do their own thing, and it's all, it was just, if it was love, it was, that's all we need. All we needed was love. And and I still kind of, I still subscribe to that, but there maybe is some parameters to that. Um, but what led me, I guess, to be more or break out of my conventional background growing up was I had been married to my husband for almost 7 years, and he decided that my high school or my college sweetheart, and he decided that he hadn't had the Playboy experience. We married when we were 20, and he
Hmm.
just hadn't had enough fun, and he wanted to pursue that, and so he left me, and um, I grew up thinking that, you know, God loved me and God was going to take care of me, and suddenly I had this terrific heartbreak, just the worst heartbreak of my life, and God hadn't protected me from that. And so I said, well, really, what the hell? Um, why is there even a God? And why should I care? Because he
Hmm.
doesn't care about me. So I just decided to do my own thing. And it was the age of Aquarius, and I had a lot of opportunities to do my own thing. And so I did. Um, and it's kind of fun to look back on it, but there were hurt that was mixed into that fun.
Sure. And so somewhere along the line, you were teaching at some point. Is that about the time frame of that?
Right.
And you met someone else and married a second time. And a lot of this book is devoted to that marriage and the hurt and the decisions that you made, and I guess and your husband made too, about divorce. So, how does religion play a role in either discouraging divorce or supporting a divorce, do you find? Or what did you find at the time?
Would you repeat that last part, please?
How did religion play a role in either discouraging you from considering divorce in your second marriage when you were pretty unhappy, or religion supporting a divorce? What was your experience with all of that? I mean, that's what a lot of the book is about, that angst between the two.
It is, and that's where the title comes from.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I well, I grew up a good Christian girl, and even though I'd done the hippie lifestyle, I still had some pretty basic beliefs about marriage and divorce, and um, I just, believed that God wanted me to be the best person I could be in my marriage, and so I had when it became apparent that we were having problems, I just kept trying to be good enough that those problems would be resolved, and thinking that's what God wanted me to do, and actually I'm not sorry for a lot of that. I know in my heart that I did the best I knew how to do. And I believe that God wanted me to do that. Um, but then it came to the point where I was so uh, hurt and so questioning my life that I did consider divorce. And so I decided to go to, I'd been in and out of counseling for 10 years. And then I finally did go to a Christian counselor, and she pointed out to me that my husband was emotionally abusive.
Mm-hmm.
Is this a good place for me to
Sure.
read
Would
about
you?
that? Maybe?
Yes. Would you like to read a passage from your book? That'd be
Yeah,
lovely.
I would. This is the prologue, and at the beginning of each chapter, I have quoted quotes, and this one I felt was particularly applicable. The most confused you will ever get is when you try to convince your heart and spirit of something your mind knows is a lie, by Sharon L. Adler. Approaching the church located in a small business park, I wonder how this latest counseling could possibly be of help. When my husband suggested I see Pastor Susan, I suspected she'd straighten. I suspected he hoped she'd straighten me out. In the last 15 or so years of our 24 marriage, I've been to Gestalt therapy, couples counseling, family counseling, individual counseling, a woman's support group, yoga therapy, tried Valium and other antidepressants, and even talked with my gynecologist. I was pretty desperate. Um, what more is there to learn? And from a conservative pastor? Still, a woman pastor in a conservative church is a bit unusual. Susan ushers me into her office and beckons me to a comfortable chair. I settle in, studying her attractive yet simple style, weighing the timbre of her voice and noticing the smile wrinkles around her eyes. Feeling an immediate connection, I sigh in relief and pour out the frustrations that have been building in me over the last several years. I don't know how to be with Jim anymore, I began. I don't know if he dislikes me or if he's just too distracted to think of me. Whatever it is, I feel disregarded and disrespected, and I'm hurt and angry. Susan listens to my story, nodding her head encouragingly. When I finish, she hands me a tissue. I hear compassion in her voice. as she asks a few questions, jotting down my answers in her notebook. Has Jim ever hit you? Her question startles me. Oh, no, he wouldn't do that. How about other physical intimidation? I pull up scenes in my mind. He has bumped into me. Our last counselor suggested he help me with cooking on occasion. I was pleased when he volunteered a few days later, but he bumped me a couple of times while we were working. Nothing hard, but it seemed odd. After I complained, he stopped, but he also stopped helping me. He's bumped me on our infrequent walks together. I've wondered if he's just clumsy or trying to make me uncomfortable. I don't know. His behavior is confusing. He never forgets my birthday or Mother's Day, and he's good at cracking my back when it gets out of alignment. Is that enough? She asks. I shake my head. No. She continues with her questions. Has Jim ever incited me to anger? You bet. Played on my sympathies. Oh, yes. Challenged my memory of something he'd said. How did you know? She sighs and delivers her startling assessment. I believe Jim's personality type will try every trick in the book to avoid taking responsibility for sabotaging your marriage. His type is good at keeping the opposite party off guard and off balance. That's what's called crazy making. Crazy makers want their victims to feel confusion and shame, making them believe they're the bad or crazy ones. All these things you told me about Jim saying one thing and then later the opposite without acknowledging the difference, his lack of empathy for your physical and emotional state, making you the bad one in the relationship, encouraging you to doubt your feelings. They convince me he's a crazy maker. I'm not optimistic he'll own up to his behavior.
Did it help for her to call him out as a crazy maker? And how did it change your view of the marriage?
It really did. I was kind of like, uh, well, if he's a crazy maker, then I'm an abused woman,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not an abused woman. I'm strong. Uh, I'm not weak. How could I be an abused woman? And and then I'm thinking, wow, is he really that bad? It uh, let's say it got the wheels turning. It got me my eyes began to open.
So, was she supportive of exploring the idea of divorce, did you feel?
I felt, it was kind of subtle, I guess you'd say. She didn't say, she didn't use the word divorce, but she told me, don't buy, we were about to move, and she said, don't buy another house with that man
Mm.
until you have gone to some really deep counseling and work things out.
What do you think about the counseling couples receive from religious figures? There are a lot of biblical quotations in your book, and it seems like those could be used in a way to make people feel that the church, I don't know, would disapprove strongly of divorce, um, and yet. Um, just what you've read, there's this other side to it, evaluating the whatever's going on in the marriage and is it abusive, which usually makes people think twice about what they're doing in a relationship.
Right. Really, my experience going to these different counselors was a spur to write this book, because there was such a dichotomy in the Christian milieu.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Um, as you know, I think I'll probably read another section when I get the opposite advice. uh, but
Mm-hmm.
let's see, where was I? So yeah, I mean, there is a huge dichotomy, and but I just recently, in fact, today I came up with a definition of what I call spiritual abuse.
Mm-hmm.
And that's battering the suffering or questioning person with misapplied biblical verses for the purpose of keeping that person under control. And there is that element in certain churches for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Even some people like Beth Moore, who's been Southern Baptist biblical teacher for all her life, has turned her back on Southern Baptist convention because she has seen the abuse against women to keep them under control.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't like that very much.
No. You write a blog called Help and Healing for Divorced Christians. What have you learned from other people's stories?
Um, I've I've solicited other people's stories. I like to even hear more, um, but it's interesting to me that I've heard people who have women who have left the church because they were shunned and shamed because they had to choose divorce. I mean, it was, in fact, I just ran across another blog last night, and it was called Life Saving Divorce. And these divorces were life saving for them and for their children.
Mm-hmm.
And yet their churches just turn their backs on these, blame them instead of the abuser.
Mm-hmm.
And that my experience was mild compared to some of these. On the other hand, I have solicited stories from women who have been supported by their Christian community. And I even have a story on my blog about a Catholic woman who struggled with uh, whether or not to leave her husband, and was not helped very much by her priest, but then eventually had another priest who encouraged her to leave. So it's all over the map, and it's all about biblical interpretation, which is, it can be such a sword. And I call it a dirty sword because it's a lie. And I won't get into all kinds of passages that this could go. I'm not a biblical scholar, but I have read a lot about it. And
Well, I could see with all the quotes, not quotes, but the biblical references that you were struggling with all those things, and I could see how someone who was perhaps in a conservative Christian community would be looking at those same passages and trying
right,
to find their way through.
right.
So after you had this second marriage, which wasn't going so well, and you ended up divorcing, you you made an interesting list after a while of requirements that you, well, I don't know if requirements is the right word, but a list of attributes you'd be looking for if you ever chose to date and marry again. And I was intrigued with that list. It was quite a list.
Yes, it was.
And it sounds like you stuck to it pretty well. And I was wondering if you'd like to share some of those, because maybe there's some people listening who've also made similar lists, or maybe are looking for a few entries in their own list that might be useful.
Well, I would love to do that, but so I'd love to revisit how came to the title of my book and what my other counselor told me before I get to that. Would that be all right?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay. So it's clearly something has to be done. 25 years of marriage, and it's just getting worse and worse. And there's just no, I looked at a chart, and we would having problems, and then we go to counseling and it'd get a little better, and then it would get a little worse than it had been before, and then it would go to counseling and it would get a little better, and then it would get a little, and it just kept going downhill. So this was our last chance Christian counselor. After several sessions with Norma, little had changed between Jim and me. Disheartened, I bring up the subject of divorce. I can't stay with Jim if he keeps pushing me away. Whenever we've been to counseling, he seems to understand how his behavior impacts our relationship. However, the gains are soon lost and he's more contrary and distant than before. We don't talk about divorce here, she declares, and quotes Matthew 19:6. Quote, so they, husband and wife, are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate. Jesus said divorce is only permitted if there is a marital unfaithfulness. If you divorce Jim, Satan wins, Norma adds.
How did you like that advice?
I mean, you can imagine it just hit me like, what? And I'm thinking, no, this is not, she's not telling me the truth. She doesn't know that. I mean, I believe she believed it, but the more I pondered on that, it was a turning point where I really delved into who am I in God's eyes, and my understanding became pretty strong, and that was God loves me more than he loves my divorce, or more than my marriage, excuse me. God loves me. He doesn't want me to be abused. I'm not a better person for being abused. Definitely not. I'm not closer to God. I'm struggling, and he does not want that for me. And so that was a turning point. I still struggled some. I mean, and I was kind of afraid. I have to admit, I was afraid. I didn't have really a way to support myself well. And, I'd been married for 25 years and I was 55 years old, and it was scary.
That is a scary time of life and situation. And you're certainly not alone having gone through that.
No.
And you'd given up quite a few opportunities for work as the years had gone by. In fact, I was real intrigued with your life as an interior designer. Did you pick that back up at that point when you were in the middle of struggling with what to do?
No, I'd always wanted to be an interior designer since I'd been in ninth grade and learned what interior designers did. I always had that urge. And I did try that in a couple of different venues. But what I learned was that unless you were in social circles with people who were interested and could afford interior designers, your chances of being successful were not very good. And so I did do some really fun things. I'm not at all sorry that I pursued that. That's kind of one of the feathers in my cap.
Sure.
I'm really glad I had that opportunity, but I just became a realist, and then being an interior designer is not as much fun as you might think, because what if you make a mistake, or what if you do something that displeases your clients? I mean, there's some dark side to being an interior designer. So I'd had my experience and I appreciated it, but I didn't really care to pursue that.
Sure. So, what was your plan then following that second divorce? Did you move? I believe you moved to Portland, didn't you, at some point?
Well, This truly is a God story, because I met my second husband in Albuquerque after my first husband had moved me there and then left me. And he had been from upstate New York. And then eventually he was transferred to Southern California. And then that job didn't turn out so well. And so he was really desperate to find another job. And the only job that he could find was in Bend, Oregon. And, I'm an Oregonian. And here I'm going back home without me really having any say over that. It's just, I really believe that was a God thing. And then eventually he quit that job in Bend and went into his own business, and that didn't turn out. And the only job he could find was in Beaverton, Oregon, right next to Tigard, where I grew up and where my parents still lived. So.
Well, that was very nice and convenient in a weird way.
It was a good thing.
Yeah. Well, would you like to talk about what happened after that? I mean, we don't want to spoil the whole book, but there were some good things that came out of all of this. And one of them was you took up ballroom dancing, and maybe talk about that and what that had to do with your list.
With that list, right.
Yeah, so who you're looking for, if you were looking for anyone.
Yeah, well, of course, I had learned a lesson going through that first divorce. And I wasn't in any hurry to find anybody. I did wish, that someday I might find someone who be my husband, my loving husband. But I wasn't in any hurry. And in fact, I talked with God about that. And I said, don't give me any substitutes. I'll wait as long as I have to wait, because I don't want to go through this again. Mm-hmm. And so, I'd always thought it might be fun to go ballroom dancing. And I became friends with a fellow in a divorce recovery group. And he said, I'd really like to try ballroom dancing. You want to go with me? And so we went to a few classes, and I found I really enjoyed it. And I got pretty good, which was, really helped my self-esteem after all that I've been through.
Sure.
So that was really great.
And so you made a list.
Yeah, I made a list. I won't read it to you because there were 30 things on that list. 30.
I know, it's very impressive. It's a lot on the list. You were thinking hard about it. That's what I took from it.
I was. I just, by then, I was over 55, and I'd been through, a lot of living. And I knew who I was, and I knew what was important to me. And I just didn't want to make it another, saying I made a mistake being married to the men I was married to. I don't know. I don't try to evaluate that, but I just didn't want to go through that kind of thing again.
Sure. And so you're not going to read us any of the list?
All right, I will. He is, of course, some are, they're flexible. Others are, no, they're set in stone. He is spiritually grounded. He is an integral part of his church. He has an active prayer life. He studies the Bible and trusts God as a wise and loving father. Then number 2, and this was interesting. He is willing to stay celibate until marriage. Now that was, I had read a book in a singles group recommended in a singles group. And the author said that, or observed that if people jump into a sexual relationship too soon, it blinds them to other parts of the personality that they don't see. And so that's why I made that decision. So after a year, I started dating a little bit with men I'd met ballroom dancing, and it became a pattern. They would say after, on the third date, they'd say, well, where did we go from here? And I knew that they meant, are you going to go to bed with me or not? And so then I would say, well, you know, I would really like to get married again someday. And until that time, and I'd really like, but before I did, I would really like to know someone well. And I plan to stay celibate until that time I marry. And they'd go, oh, well, you're not going to find anybody who's going to go along with that. And I'd say, well, if they don't go along with that, I know that they're not the right person for me, right? And I mean, it got to be kind of funny. I really, you know, no, I'm not going to go to bed with you. It was that simple.
Yeah. Well, okay. So that worked out for you.
That worked out. Want it anymore? Let's see.
Didn't they have to be a good dancer? Wasn't that on the list? It seems like I read that. Maybe not.
I don't think so. But in fact, when I danced with all kinds of dancers of all levels. And of course, as I got better, the better dancers wanted to dance with me. But, you know, some of the men were not good dancers. But I never, ever let them know I thought they were a bad dancer. I gave myself a dance code. And the dance code was never let your partner know that you don't think they're very good at dancing. And also there's another more general dance code that if someone asks you to dance and you don't care to dance with them, then you don't accept a dance with someone else for that dance. So there's protocol there. And so one evening, a gentleman asked me to dance, and he didn't dance according to known dance steps. Let's put it that way.
That's very diplomatic.
He thought he knew dance steps, but they were the standard ones. Let's put it that way. But he was very personable and introduced himself and asked me about myself. And some of these dancers, you know, I mean, hardly even looked me in the eye. They just wanted to dance, and they didn't even see me as a person, you know. But this gentleman, you know, wanted to know a little about me and told me a little bit about himself, and that was nice. And then I forgot all about him.
And is this the man you married finally?
This is the man I married.
Well, that sounds like an auspicious beginning. Did he improve as a dancer?
He did. He once we became really interested in each other, he found out that I was going to classes at a dance studio, and he said, I'd really like to go and learn how to dance properly. And so I introduced him to my instructor, and she said, well, I'll test you and see how you do. And it was awkward. It was really awkward. But then she started giving him a little advice on how to do this and he caught on really fast. And so we had a lot of fun dancing together.
Well, there's so much joy that comes with dancing. I mean, for people that enjoy it. And it's lovely the way you describe it in your book. I'm curious how long it took you to write this book, how long it was in the making. I've heard often people say it has taken them 10 years to write their book. Were you working on it for that long?
About 15.
Woo, 15. Okay.
I started out, I had 10 years of journals.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started out just transcribing them into the computer. And then just kind of stringing them together. And I didn't really understand in the beginning the form of memoir. And so I rewrote it several times until finally I got to the point where I felt, yes, this is a good book.
You still have to have a narrative arc for memoir. There has to be a story to it. No one's going to want to read just a list of facts. And
Right,
so, yes, that's a discovery of what makes a good memoir, what keeps people reading.
right.
Yeah. And I think often people read memoirs hoping there's a good resolution, not exactly a happy ending, but that something has been learned by the writer or that the reader can learn something. Yeah. And so it sounds like you came to terms with your religious views and your divorce. And I'm curious what advice you have for other people and how they decide when a marriage is over. I mean, you've talked about the spiritual abuse aspect, and I'm sure if there's physical abuse, that's a whole nother consideration.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Hmm.
Um,
I'm sure it's tough for anyone to decide when to call it.
it is tough. Sometimes there's, that moment in time when there's no question. And other times it's just, it's a evolving process.
Do you think it's easier for men or women to give up on the marriage? Any sense of that?
I think men are maybe a little more inclined to give up on a marriage, especially, some of these women who've written to me, um, their husbands find someone else before the marriage is over, and and trying to fight for your marriage at that point, from my experience, is
It's pretty tough,
not successful very often.
right? Well, and we've come through a time where more women have more successful, monetarily speaking, careers, and it's putting them in a slightly different economic position than many of us that were born in the 50s, for example, or 40s. There's more power now, but it's still a very hard decision for people.
It is. I mean, there are sometimes, of course, there are children involved,
Hmm.
and but sometimes that's a good reason to divorce is for the children, so
Hmm.
they're not involved in all that conflict.
And you've got a son. I'm not sure how old he is, maybe in his 40s, somewhere in that range.
50.
50.
Yeah,
Okay. And yes, and he comes up in the book a little bit.
he does. He's never married, and I don't know that what he experienced in
Hmm.
our home was part of that or not.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
I personally, I'm sorry he's alone, but I'm also glad that he isn't in a bad relationship.
Hmm.
Um, but he was a perceptive young person, and I'm sure it was not. I know it wasn't easy to feel that underlying tension that we had going. I mean, we rarely had big fights.
Mm-hmm.
There was just all this underlying anger
Mm-hmm.
happening. Atmosphere in the home was not not good.
How old was your son when you divorced?
He was, wow, I'm not good at numbers. Let's see. He was probably around 25,
Mm-hmm.
maybe late 20s.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was living in Seattle at the time, and so I drove up from uh, Tualatin and from Oregon, and sat down with him on his couch and said, things haven't been good for a really long time between your dad and me, and I just have to leave.
Mm-hmm. Well, hopefully he was old enough, mature enough to take that well.
He was. He
Yes.
understood.
Yeah.
He understood, and it's interesting. His dad just died last week.
I was going to ask you if his father was still living. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he one of the things that I kept, I guess, harping on him was to take care of himself, to be a happy man, to live a good life, and he just couldn't bring himself to do that, and didn't take care of himself after he left me and remarried. He remarried secretly within a month of our divorce, which really uh,
Ouch.
sent me into a tailspin. I just didn't
Sure.
know that he was that far gone, I guess.
Sure.
So that was really hard to take, but it also freed me.
Sure. Sure. Now, at this point, if there are any people in the audience that have questions for Linda, you can type them in the chat box at the bottom of your screen, and she's willing to take questions. Anybody have anything out there? Well, they've just been soaking up these pearls, Linda. They're speechless. So your book is out. It's available at the moment. Yes.
Yes, it's available through Village Books. I'm so grateful for them to be sponsoring this. I'm so grateful that they're in the community. Um, how difficult was it to reread your journals as you transcribe them? Um, yeah, that's a good question. It was hard. And my critique group, I should mention, I took my manuscript to my critique group and cried through some of it, as I read. And bless their souls, they let me. I did the first version, which was months, and then I realized that I really need to rewrite, and went through the whole thing again with them. So, wow, they were just terrific. I just can't say enough for a good critique group. But yeah, in the beginning, I would cry, but after a while, it, instead of becoming emotional, it became craft.
Yes.
It
Mhm.
it didn't grab me uh, the way it did in the beginning. It became craft, and how do I make this as readable, understandable as I can? And I really enjoyed uh, the editing and the editing until I could shape it.
Mhm. There's another question. It's from Donna. How did you cope with people in your church who did not approve of your decision to divorce?
I left one of my churches because I just didn't feel supported by them. Not that they turned their back on me. I was just kind of a non-entity. Um, and but so I didn't directly, well, I'll tell you a couple of anecdotes and that relates to that. And that's, my husband had gotten involved with Promise Keepers, which is a conservative Christian men's group. And after I divorced my husband, one of the members of his group wrote me a letter. It was a hate letter, telling me how, I dishonored God, and it was awful.
Not bad. Not bad.
And I tell how the way I got took care of some of my anger during that time was I had my van, and I would get on the freeway and I would just pound on the steering wheel and yell at the top of my lungs that nobody could hear me. And so there was this great therapy. So I did that. And then I thought, if I respond in an angry way, well, he accused me as being an angry woman. And I thought, if I respond in an angry way, I'm going to absolutely cement that concept of me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so instead, I wrote a letter telling how he'd hurt me and how I felt he'd thrown rocks at me, like in the Bible. And I told him I didn't really care to correspond with him anymore. And so a week later, I got another letter from him. I thought, oh, do I open this? And so I opened it, and he apologized.
Good. Sometimes when you call out the bullies, you get a result.
Exactly.
Oh boy. Yeah. So did you say you changed churches as a result of that?
Then I went looking for churches, and I found one church I thought I might really like, and I talked with the pastor a couple of times, and then he said, well, he said, you decided to divorce your husband. It wasn't the other way around. And I go, I left my husband. And he said, I don't know that you're going to be really happy here. Why don't you go to the church down the road, and they have a big singles group? And I said, I will. And I did, and it was great. It was wonderful. It helped save me. And I just said to the Lord, you know this man, you know his heart, you know what he's dealing with. I know you're going to take care of him. However.
Well, you came out of it pretty well. You've been through a lot. And you're pretty happily married now, it sounds like.
Absolutely.
That's a lovely thing.
It's a lovely thing. I mean, we believe that the Lord put us together, and that helps keep us together, knowing that. Of course, we have our moments, and we've had a little counseling here and there, because we've both been married. This is our third marriage, both of us, and we have our issues that are baggage, and but yeah, it's amazing how well matched we are. And Bill, my husband, has gone through the whole book with me, helping me revise it. Went back to teaching so I could afford to publish it.
Good job, Bill.
I can't say enough about how great my husband is.
So what do you think is the strongest takeaway from your book for a reader? What do you hope?
I hope that, well, it breaks my heart that some group of Christians misrepresent my Lord with hate and judgment. So that's one of my takeaways, I hope, is that that they don't represent God, that God loves us and wants to be with us and help us. Um, and that if we stick to our truth, that truth is a huge thing for me. And if we stick to our truth, we're going to be okay.
And what advice would you give to churches today regarding the treatment of divorced people?
Divorced people are hurting people, and
Mm-hmm.
just love on them, you know, just love on them,
Lift them up.
right?
Yeah. Well, Linda, thank you so much for sharing about your life and for this book that you've written. And I hope it touches those who need to um, be lifted up by it. I don't know if that's the thing to say or not, but you've had success with previous books in different genres,
I have.
totally different than this. And I wish you all the best for this book.
Thank you.
You're
Thank
so
you.
welcome.
I really appreciate your friendship and you shepherding me along with this talk.
Well, my pleasure. My pleasure. So let's see. Does Claire have something else to say? Oh, yes, you can.
You bet I do.
Okay.
Well, first and foremost, I just want to say, Linda, thank you so much for sharing your story. You are uh, very inspiring. Your strength of everything that you have been through, and listening to your stories, it was very, very moving and very inspiring. And I appreciate your sharing that with us and with the world. And your conversation, yours and Anne's tonight, it was a great conversation to listen to, and I appreciate it so much, both of you being here. And I'm very grateful to the audience who turned out tonight. And of course, as the bookseller in the room, if you look in the chat, you'll see the link straight to the Village Books website where you can purchase a copy of this book right here. And we would be very grateful if you do, to support an author and an independent bookstore. So Linda, Anne, do you have any final words for our audience tonight?
Oh, just thanks a lot for showing up and supporting me and supporting Village Books. And some of you are from the Skagit Valley Writers League, and kudos to the league. And just thanks for being here. Thanks for your love.
And I appreciate your example of sticking with your project and bringing it to publication. Very impressive.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I don't think it was a choice.
Well, whatever. You've done it.
Right.
Good. Yeah, wonderful.
Yes, and congratulations. Yeah, that was, what did you say, 15 years? 15 years in the making?
Right.
Wow. Wow. All right. Well, ladies, thank you so much. And thank you to the audience. And this video actually will be available on our YouTube channel, on the Village Books YouTube channel. So you can watch this or share this link with folks who can watch it and be inspired also. So I think with that, we're going to say good night.
Good
All
night.
right. Good
Thank
night.
you, Claire.
All
Thank
right.
you, Claire.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Linda.